everyone, and welcome to our training 2025 Outlook, How to Strengthen Your Ransomware Defenses. By way of introduction, my name is Emily Jarvis, and I'm the Senior Manager for Events here at GovLoop. And today I have the added pleasure of also being your moderator, so thanks so much for joining me. And a special thank you to our partners at Veeam for helping us put on this session today. So let's get right to it, because as cybersecurity threats are becoming increasingly sophisticated, government agencies at all levels are facing a difficult task of securing their networks. Just look at these facts about ransomware attacks at the state and local level. 49% were due to a compromised credential. A stunning 98% of attacks led to data encryption, and 99% involved attempts to compromise backups. On average, government victims ended up paying 104% of their ransom demanded. So, with these stats, what should agencies be focusing their efforts on to support the evolving government cybersecurity posture? Well, to answer those questions, we've brought together two wonderful experts who are going to share their best practices and lessons learned. But before we get into all of that, I have a few housekeeping items to go over with you all. First things first, if you are on Twitter or X or whatever the heck they're calling that social media platform these days, you can follow along with us using the hashtag GLTrain. We also have some great resources available for you on the console, so make sure you check those out because you don't want to miss out on a single learning opportunity. If you need to access the closed captioning feature, just look for the icon on the bottom right-hand side of the media player. That's where my face is showing up right now. Click that button and you'll get that added accessibility. Of course, we hope you don't have any technical difficulties, but if you do, send us a message to that Ask a Question tab, and my colleague Caitlin will make sure to get your questions answered. But here's the secret sauce of today's session, friends, because it's in that same portal where you can ask our experts questions. So don't you dare be shy. Put your questions in early and often, because that's what we're here for. We're here to answer your questions. Finally, we are recording this training, so check your inboxes tomorrow because we'll email you a link so you can watch the entire session on demand or send it along to one of your colleagues. All right, with all of that housekeeping out of the way, let's get to the good stuff by introducing you to our two speakers. Joining us, we have Jerry Simpson, who's the State Deputy CIO for Infrastructure Services for the City of Phoenix, and Jeff Ricard, who is the Vice President for Solution Strategy in the Office of the CTO at Veeam. Thank you both so very much for being with us today. And I know we've got a wonderful presentation underway, so with that, Jeff, I'm going to hand the floor over to you.
That sounds perfect. Thank you so much for the introduction, Emily. And I will just reinforce what Emily said about asking questions. We want to make sure that you can take full advantage of Jerry's expertise and Jerry's experience doing data protection and ransomware resilience for the City of Phoenix. And if you've got questions for Veeam as well about data protection, go ahead and ask them. Delighted to answer. So Jerry, I will move things over to you. If you don't mind, could you take a second and introduce the audience to your background? You're the Deputy CIO for Infrastructure for the City of Phoenix. What does that entail day to day?
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate the time and appreciate you guys inviting me to the webinar. So I've been in government a little over 30 years. I've been with the state of Arizona and then early in my career. And in the last 25 years, I've been working for the City of Phoenix. My current position, I'm in charge of infrastructure, so everything you can touch and feel, the server, storage, VMware environment, virtualization environment. It also includes cloud environments and our Office 365 tenants. So very, very much heavily involved in a lot of the infrastructure at the city, centralized infrastructure.
That's perfect. Go ahead.
Yeah. And on top of that, we are also heavily involved in our disaster recovery process and systems and our backups, which we recently moved to Veeam, and obviously our server monitoring. So that's where the connection with Veeam and our DR strategy kind of came together.
That makes a ton of sense. Now, you and I have been working in the infrastructure area for about the same length of time, and both work with data protection. And I'm interested that you mentioned cloud and O365, because especially since COVID, but obviously even before that, I've seen a lot of state and local governments make that move in a big way to putting more apps in the cloud, maybe to reduce the number of data centers they're running. I'm assuming that that's something that Phoenix is gone through and is going through as well.
Yeah, most definitely. COVID hit hard and put a lot of hey, a lot of people had to start working from home, and as that initiative came through, having Office 365, the need to secure it a little bit more for remote users became very apparent, right? And so having the ability and the technical skills around to do that quickly was a big deal for the city. So you're exactly right. We did that Office 365. While we were already there, it was the security around it that became, okay, how do we get people securely accessing their email, their files, their on the other side of the firewall type systems. How do they get to those?
No, that makes a ton of sense. So let's speak a little bit about what the infrastructure for Phoenix looks like now at the end of 2024. And I want to preface this, and I know that all of our public sector and education attendees will understand. Jerry, I know when I talk with folks, there are certainly limits that our security team put on what we can talk about, what we can disclose in the environment in terms of architecture, tools, all that. So believe me, my feelings won't be hurt if I ask a question about the environment, and it's something you can't disclose a lot of. But in terms of the balance, what does Phoenix look like right now with maybe the balance between data center resources versus cloud resources? Is stuff mostly in the cloud? Is it about half and half?
So it's mostly on-prem. Most of our virtualized environment is still on-prem, split between a couple of data centers. We have a pretty heavy implementation on-prem storage and servers, but we have taken the approach of large ERP type applications, or applications that make sense, that are more you would say software as a service, SaaS products. Or platforms that have been moved to the cloud. So we took our financial system, and that was moved up into the cloud, government cloud, and it runs managed service through a vendor, and they take care of that large application, if that helps. So areas that made a lot of sense. We do have some footprint in Azure, where we have some development work up there. And again, utilizing strategically, strategic partners, vendors, and others to help us make that migration on where it makes sense. The big struggle, like always, it's always been what is that virtual environment, the stuff that lives on-prem, that investment. What do you do about that? Do you go full bore and put everything in the cloud? You still, there's still costs there, plus the skill sets and other things, right? There's considerations to make, and have those discussions while you're still keeping everything running, right? So
of course,
a lot of conversations. But our environment right now looks more. It's just grown, I'll say.
Yeah, right.
As time permits.
Yeah, no, makes complete sense. I was interested a couple of years ago that there was another city in the Southwest that had moved a lot of data to the cloud and ended up repatriating data on-prem. It sounds like you guys have been pretty measured in how you moved things up in terms of managing cost and figuring out criticality. Public sector is not public sector, I'm sorry, public safety is another area that I often talk with folks who have basically moved everything but public safety data up to the cloud, or other things that might be secure. And I assume that there have been considerations like that Phoenix has gone through as well.
So you're right. There is a lot of systems, you know, niche systems that come into play and that are cloud-based for public safety and do make a lot of sense. But there's also those, you know, and my experience, I worked 12 years with the fire department in IT as their IT manager. It has been, you know, those crown jewel systems, you know, those, you know, 911 call centers, those computer-aided dispatch systems, those systems that live inside fire stations that alert the fire department. You know, those got to be real careful about how, you know, how they're exposed and what they're doing, and a lot of times you're locking those down and not letting them access the internet, you know, or unless they really need to, you know. And I wouldn't necessarily call them, you know, people have throw the term out there, air gap. I would say they're strategically, you know, locked down in areas so that they, you know, that they aren't, you know, as vulnerable. But obviously there's still ways, right? If there's a will, there's a way. But for the most part, those systems do take extra, you know, work to make sure you're doing it in a very strategic manner.
That makes sense. And actually, you introduce a good point, and you mentioned this before. So at this point, Phoenix has been a pretty significant Veeam customer for a while. I know that Veeam has been used to protect data in your ESX and your vSphere environment on-prem. I know that you all have used some of our integrations with some of the storage platforms that you've chosen. Could you talk our listeners a little bit through sort of what Phoenix is protecting with Veeam? And the reason that I would like to do that is it leads us well into the more ransomware focused conversation and data loss focused conversation that we're about to have.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, so we're protecting all our systems from financials to HR systems to our billing systems, all being backed up using Veeam. So all of our business functions, you know, the city of Phoenix operates, it's one city, but it has, you know, 26, you could say, lines of business. So they're all running some form of line of business. A lot of them are general, you know, centralized, run through our data centers. And then you have a lot of groups that are federated and kind of do and have their own IT departments, but, you know, they work with us closely. We are, with the central IT coming on to Veeam, we are 100% now a Veeam customer throughout the city. So all of our federated and centralized departments are running on Veeam. We have taken Veeam, you know, from our standpoint, we've included it in our DR. So we have a DR as a service, which is a cloud-based solution, and we're using Veeam Orchestrator to get through that planning process, get through the testing, and that's because we're in the infancy stage there. We are implementing Veeam Orchestrator. We are also backing up our cloud tenant with Microsoft. We back those systems up with Veeam as well.
Excellent.
Yeah, so that's definitely a posture. That's definitely an approach we've taken. It's been pretty successful.
Perfect. So we're talking about critical data. And for those of you who have joined us, and I really appreciate all of our viewers today, we have the ability in this platform to poll. And I'd like, Emily, if you don't mind, if you could introduce the first poll that folks have. And if you look in your window, if you've got it reduced in size, you can scroll down if there's any choices that you don't see in that poll. The reason we'd like you to answer this, and we'll have a couple more poll questions, we think it'll be interesting for you to see where other people stand, but also I'm going to introduce a little bit of Veeam research as we go through our conversation today. So we're going to go ahead and look at some Veeam research about the exact issues that we're going to ask all of our attendees about. And it would be interesting if you could fill this in just so that you could see sort of where you compare or where things line up in your environment. If you don't know, it's fine to choose don't know, but don't worry that these answers will be tracked. They are 100% anonymous. We are just doing it basically for the edification of me and Jerry and for all the other folks that we have online. While we wait for this poll to close out, and we're going to wait about a minute to make sure everyone has a chance to put an entry in, about the research we're going to look at. We're going to look at stats from two Veeam research properties. We use third-party companies. We don't know who the organizations are that are answering us. They don't know that it's Veeam answering the question, asking the questions. It's double blind. But we do this for two reasons. We do it to find out more for our development, what we should be focusing on based on what folks are experiencing and what they need. But we also do it because, believe it or not, I still have conversations with folks who are not in the position that Jerry's in, who are not protecting all the data that they need to protect, and maybe getting more data, more information about what they ought to be protecting or what best practices are, can help to arm them when they have conversations with leadership about the direction they should be going. So, Emily, have we had our minute? Do you think we're where we need to be on the poll?
We are very, very close. We'll give people 5 more seconds if they're weighing an option, and then we'll go ahead and push out the results of the poll. And it looks like coming in at the top here is IT infrastructure failure on premise, whether that's hardware, software, or an operating system of some kind.
Yep, that's what it looks like. And an actual exact tie between cybersecurity events and human error, non-negligible for cloud service outages. I am very happy that no one's been affected by fires or floods or hurricanes. That is good to see. And it's perfectly fine to don't know. So let's pivot now, and we will take a quick look at what Veeam learned in our data protection trends survey. Every year we ask the same question. This year it was 1,200 folks worldwide. And we say 2 questions. If you could choose everything that caused you to have an outage in the last 12 months, that's the blue line that you can see on the top here. And you'll notice, because you can choose more than one thing, it doesn't add up to 100%, right? It adds up to a higher number than that. Well, what's interesting is that in the broader sample of folks that we talked to, cybersecurity events were the most common. And if you look at that skinny red line under it, that's if you can only choose one, what was the most impactful event that you had that caused an outage in the past year? For the 4th year in a row, the cybersecurity event question was the most common and most impactful. Now, I was interested that it was exactly tied with human error in the survey that we just took among people here. Because if you notice, accidental deletion, overwrite of data, or data corruption was not at the bottom of the list by a mile in the broader survey. That's a little bit more than halfway down. We also didn't have a lot of folks who had suffered their most impactful outage being a natural disaster, but it was not negligible in this. So you're in the business, Jerry. This is the life that you live, figuring out how to guard against this sort of things. What has Phoenix's experience been with putting in place guardrails and protections to guard against this kind of thing?
Well, a lot of effort. I'll say it's a lot of work, a lot of effort, a lot of good people getting together, working with operations, security, networking teams. You know, getting the right pieces in place, and it's probably a never-ending, constant battle, right, that you're going through. I wouldn't argue with these trends at all. They all look the same. And for those of us that are, if we're looking for trends, you know, some of them, they weren't even in the last 3-4 months. You know, the impacts weren't even cyber, right? They were just really bad mistakes by vendors that, you know, we want to slap them now. But hopefully we've gotten to a point, you know, those were some pretty impactful events for those people that were customers of those vendors. So it can hit, and it does happen. And, you know, this we take the approach of we work together, we work with the business, you know, we work with senior leadership, and we put the plans in place and just get people the tools to monitor, the plans to communicate, and just constantly work with our teams.
Perfect. And you're adding orchestration now, which is always great to hear. That's
you know,
critical.
That triggered, that was really, yeah. So, you know, we also understand, there's stuff you got to put in on the front end. Make sure that you're putting all the main tools, the basic stuff that's there, from MFA to monitoring to reviewing policies, and watching traffic that's flowing left and right, north and south throughout your network. But then on the back end, right, you have the backups, you have the immutable copies, you have the copy off site, all the basic stuff. Make sure that that's there, because if God forbid something does happen and it gets through those defenses you have on the front end, the back end people are the ones that are gonna have your data, right? We're gonna have that thing protected and ready to go. So that's the most critical piece in an incident like a cybersecurity incident, right? Is make sure that data is protected.
Perfect. Which actually leads into a couple of the questions that we've got in Q&A. And Tracy and others that have submitted questions, we will get to them, because we are pivoting now specifically to ransomware. And if we could, Emily, go to the next poll question. This question basically just asks, and again, it's anonymous. We're not going to have any idea who you are, who's answering, but it's kind of an interesting question to put out there. How many ransomware attacks has your organization suffered in the last 12 months? The reason, as with the last question, that we're asking this is we have some stats on this from another survey that we do every year. This is another 1,200 organizations. It was published in June of this year, and we will have a download link for you at the end of the presentation today. That's our ransomware trends survey. And basically, we talk to 1,200 organizations globally that only need two things to be included in the survey. They have to be more than 1,000 seats, so they're slightly larger organizations, and they have to have been affected, their organization, by a ransomware attack. The attacker must have gotten on the network and tried to set off an attack in the previous year. It's very interesting to find out what the results are of that. We ask in the data protection trends survey, which is the more general one that we do that comes out at the beginning of the year, hey, did somebody try to get on your network and set off a ransomware attack? We're going to look at that one first. Did somebody attack you? And then we're going to dig into a little bit more detail from organizations who we know got attacked about how that went down, what the actual results were for their organization when they got hit. So we have to wait, I think, a minute. And Emily, I'll let you tell me when we are where we need to be to present that. And then we're going to start digging into ransomware specifically in cybersecurity a little bit more.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Jeff. Yeah, we're going to give folks about 10 more seconds here to make their selections. And I think sometimes we don't want to admit things, but like Jeff said, this is a very safe space. So feel free to put your answers in here. And I'm going to go ahead and push out the results. And a whopping 56% said none, which is...
Right.
Incredible.
That's great news. Good for you. Good for you. You're clearly tuning into the right educational webinars and dialing into this stuff correctly. So we have 11.1% with one attack, 5.6% with two, and don't know or prefer not to say, which I totally get. If that's not exactly in your purview and you're not sure what's gone down in your environment, that makes complete sense. Let me share what we heard in the Data Protection Trends Survey when we asked 1,200 organizations what had happened to them worldwide. And I will let you know, even though this looks pretty grim, the stats line up well with surveys that are similar that are done by, for example, anti-malware companies or other vendors in our space. What we found was that 25% had not suffered a ransomware attack, at least that they were aware of, which leaves 75% who did suffer one or more attacks that they're aware of in the last 12 months. We submitted these questions out into the field in early 2024 and published in the middle of the year. So we asked basically for the calendar year 2023, what was your results? What I'd like to draw your attention to, and it's highlighted in the box here, is we have these sort of scary looking red bars over on the right with 13% getting hit 4 times, 5 times at 9%, and then it goes up from there. 26%, which in other words, more than the number who were not affected at all, were hit 4 or more times by ransomware attacks in the last year. Now, Veeam helps organizations all the time recover from these attacks. And we know how long it takes, and we know how impactful these attacks are. The truth is, if your agency or if your community has been hit, or your college or school system has been hit 4 or more times in a year, there's a significant portion of your year where you're doing nothing but responding to ransomware attacks. That's your job, is to try to recover from ransomware attacks. One of the things that we also find based on this is that there's a lot of organizations that don't have good protocols in place to avoid reinfecting themselves, which is, of course, why we see these multiple attacks. Now, Jerry, I promised at the beginning that I wasn't going to ask you specifically about Phoenix, because I know that we're not going to do that. But I also know from having a lot of these conversations, everybody talks to each other. You have friends who work in state government, you have friends who work for other municipalities and other agencies. So what I'd like to ask in a general way is, can you share what you have heard or what your peers' experience has been about ransomware attacks in the public sector? What is the landscape like specifically for public sector agencies now?
No, I think that's a good question, and honestly, there is more concern, right? There is definitely more concern as the political environment comes into play, as more things happen in government, and there's more change. There's more things being done. Commercial coming in and moving in. Factories or other things that some of the state actors don't like, right? So there's definitely a high vigilance, a high amount of activity. It's people are taking it more seriously. They are concerned, and you hear it all the time too. Is even if you offer to pay the ransom, you don't always get your data back. So people have really taken into that account that we really need to make sure our backups not only are they pristine, but they're not compromised in any way, right? So there are a lot of effort around on the back end that maybe wasn't there 10, 15 years ago, where it's a big effort on testing those backups, restoring those backups, having something like a Veeam Sure backup solution automated, that you're making sure on the back end you're spending time doing that, right? Because the worst thing you can do is you get through this scenario and your backups have been corrupted, or your backup restores aren't working the way you thought they were because you just never had time to test them, right? And didn't think that was a priority. Well, you don't want that to be the reason that you can't restore, you can't get back online. So so a lot more emphasis in those areas, and a lot more vigilance. I think in the public sector around ransomware has definitely happened over the last 3-4 years.
It's an excellent point, and that's been my experience and our experience at Veeam as well. We got a question from Nicole in the Q&A. She said, if you personally or your company or agency is a victim of a ransomware attack, why can't you just factory reset your computers and use a backup to get access again without paying or losing everything? Well, Jerry, I think what you just said, that you absolutely can, but you need to make sure that option is still available for you, right?
Right. It's the testing, the process, and understanding how you're going to do that. What is the efforts there? Luckily, haven't been had to go through a ransomware type event, but I've been through system outages. I've been through other different things where data is in question, and when the data is not there and you don't have your VMs in the right places and you don't have the policies in place to restore properly, it becomes a cluster, and people are just sitting around screaming and yelling. So having those playbooks, having those recovery plans, having people understand where to look, and having run through a scenario that's time well spent. And then so if it does ever happen to you, you're able to to guide people through that process, and recovering from the incident, whatever it may be, whether it's ransomware or some other outage.
Or something else like we talked about before, because all the things we used to have to back up and plan DR for still happen as well. And in fact, referring back to the user poll, the viewer poll that we saw before, human error is something we've got to contend with too, right? And the same technologies that can protect you against a bad guy who has admin credentials in your environment trying to delete your data can protect you against a good guy who has admin credentials in your environment who's about to make a mistake, right? So it's critical.
It is critical, and it goes all the way. It's through the whole stack, right? So you could have an engineer make a mistake with the configuration, or you could have someone on the network makes a firewall change and it didn't go well. But you also got to remember your service delivery, your service desk, and your service management staff. While these events are happening, the bad guys, they kind of know, they monitor these things, so they know if there's an event going on, and they have those numbers, and they will. We've had incidents where we've actually had people contact help desk and say, hey, I'm a vendor X, Y, or Z, and I'm supposed to take care of the system. I need access, but everything's down, but I need access to these systems to bring them back up. And it's like, well, who are you? So having a good, well-trained, the frontline people knowing that, hey, there's an incident going on. Don't get fooled into giving away credentials, right? You're not supposed to, regardless of how crazy things might be, regardless of how everybody is, in that panic state, keeping the calm and helping people and making sure they have a place to go to ask questions. Hey, and learn people that something else is going on.
Yeah, exactly. Now, you've mentioned a couple of different technologies for keeping data protection, for keeping backup data safe from a threat actor who might be in the environment. We're going to go to our final poll question today before we talk about that a little bit more specifically. To introduce these concepts for those of you who maybe don't work with data protection day to day, and it's fine if you don't, there's a variety of ways that you can protect backup data from a threat actor in your environment, even if they have managed to compromise administrative credentials and they might, otherwise be able to delete backups, which of course they try to do because the threat actor who has ransomed your environment knows perfectly well that if you can recover successfully from backup, Nicole, to your question in the Q&A, then you don't have to pay a ransom. Unfortunately, what Veeam's research, and again, this is double blind on organizations, not Veeam customers necessarily, just organizations chosen because they've been hit by ransomware attacks out in the environment. What we found in the last ransomware trend survey is that it is a minority of organizations who are able to recover from backups alone. That percentage in the ransomware trend survey was 15%. Unfortunately, what we found is that when organizations were hit, 81% ended up paying some amount of ransom to get some amount of their data back. As Jerry pointed out, you don't have any guarantee if you make that awful decision to pay that ransom that you are in fact going to get all your data back. But there are organizations who find they haven't adequately protected their backups, and they don't have any choice but to do that. There's a variety of ways you can do that. Of course, Veeam supports all of these. It includes cloud storage. It includes going through a service offering that has immutability in a different security context. It includes multiple options for protecting data on premises with immutability or with snapshot blocking or other capabilities in that area. Of course, an oldie but a goodie, and Jerry, I have heard so many of these conversations over my career about tape. Tape isn't going anywhere. Tape still, for many organizations with large data sets, is a great solution for data protection. And of course, a tape that's taken out of the tape library can't be affected by a threat actor. I'm assuming you're still seeing tape used in organizations that you're aware of or folks you talk to, or perhaps at Phoenix as well.
So we just got rid of our last of our backups. We do at least, but there are areas, yes, most definitely. Certain groups, process control systems. You have critical systems that that's the way they do it, right? Because they got to keep that level of security for data protection and other things. So yeah, there is still there is still some tape out there, and there's a good strategic reason for it.
Makes sense. Makes sense. All right, Emily, I will let you let us know when we can move on past the poll question. Cloud service offering, excellent choice. Don't know. Okay, that's totally fair. If you're not working every day in that space, and then cloud storage and hyperscale. It's interesting, the option of getting somebody to help you do this who is an expert is something that is increasingly attractive to folks. It makes complete sense that this would be a direction that most of our respondents who knew what their agency or what their organization was doing went with. Let's look briefly at the answer that we got in Veeam research when we asked the same question. This is from Ransomware Trends 2024. What we found out when we asked folks, what are you doing to protect your data? And again, today's session is meant to be educational. So if this is something that your organization, your agency is not doing, or your city or town is not doing, this is something to think about. There are very viable options for cloud storage that you can use with Veeam or with other tools that let you make sure that that data, once it's put up in the cloud, is safe. A lot of those options, if you look, the second most chosen option when we asked this question, do rely, exactly as the majority of our respondents who knew what they were doing answered, on cloud services. It makes a lot of sense, especially as we move more to software as a service platforms like Salesforce, like SAP Online, like Microsoft 365, of course. If we're using software as a service up in the cloud, why wouldn't I choose to back that up using a software as a service platform as well? So you can see that's very popular. Various on-premises options were also popular with many of our respondents. There are many organizations like Phoenix, you mentioned earlier as well, Jerry, that of course use multiple layers of this because that gives you the most chances that something is going to survive if you get hit, right? Redundancy is a basic design principle for a lot of these things, and backup is no exception. So interesting to see what our responses were. We're going to pivot to some questions from the audience here in just a second, but in line with our plans to basically take advantage of Jerry's insights into what's going on and the way that you protect. Jerry, if you can disclose this, could you talk a little bit more about what you have seen effective and what you have seen go into place around secure and immutable backups, around ransomware preparedness, in order to keep the city safe? And again, I'll qualify that by saying that if you can't talk about Phoenix directly, which I totally understand, things that you know your peers are doing that you've heard are commonly or increasingly being done for state and local government specifically, that would be great.
Yeah, so one of the first things we started to do is analyze the strategy. What do we currently do? What are we implementing as far as that front end security stack of applications? What is going to be policy driven? What is going to be OPSEC? What is going to be operational? And as far as what are the teams going to have to monitor and fix and report on? And identify as misconfigurations, or and start to remediate those things out in the field. On the back end side, obviously we settled in on a tool. We took full advantage of your guys' TAM philosophy, the customer advisory boards. Really got engaged in understanding the tool and all the features and functions of what it can do on the back end. And then got people certified on the Veeam platform, so that they have formal expertise in running that. So it wasn't just, hey, send a couple people to class. It was an engagement in what does this new tool do, and how does that play into our overall security posture. So as we've implemented the tools, we've implemented the training. We put put a program around that to say what are the policies, what are the response plans, what are the playbooks that allow us to to respond, in case of an incident. And then it's a matter of, keeping that communication line open, because I can almost guarantee you when the incident does occur or when something does happen, everyone's initially is in shock, right? You're trying to figure out what's going on because nobody really knows at the time.
Right. Yep.
Usually, you don't really know what's happening unless there's a big, like you see on TV, right? That big spider screen that says you're under attack. We got everything. That usually doesn't happen, right? That usually is usually coming later, or people start to figure it out. We have incident commanders, people that come in and run the show when there's something that does happen, whether it's a system outage or worse. There's always somebody on the call that's calming the people down, getting the information from the technical staff, finding out what's happening throughout the process. So, those are why it's trying to take. And again, I spent a long time at the fire department and their IT group. A lot of incidents every day. You tend to follow kind of the same process. Is get an understanding of what's going on. Get your tools together. What's the plan? What's the playbook? What do we need to resolve? And then get everybody marching towards the same steps. I think that's pretty well. Everybody works in that fashion.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And that's actually perfect. Again, with our goal today for our attendees of making sure that this is educational for everyone who has joined in. Part of the Department of Homeland Security is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, who is super active in publishing best practices in helping organizations in all sectors. They do this for healthcare, they do it for government, they do it for multiple sectors with recommendations that are tailored specifically. But they have for quite a while now published a resource. The link to it, the URL is here at the bottom of this slide, www.cisa.gov stop ransomware. And the very first 3 recommendations that CISA makes in this guide, before they start getting detailed, before they get into sector specific or technology specific recommendations, the very first recommendation that they make is keep secure backups of all your critical systems. And exactly to your point, Jerry, test those, because you can't recover what you haven't backed up. And having been doing this myself over 20 years, it is discouraging to see folks who believe they were protected, but who left out some key component of an application or key component of a system, and in fact can't recover their data, can't back up and running. The other thing also ties, Jerry, the next recommendation into exactly what you were just saying, which is you need to create and maintain a basic cyber incident response plan. That includes a communications plan. Who has the authority to declare an incident, like you were talking about, Jerry, incident commanders? Who has the authority to communicate with other stakeholders inside your organization, with the public, with any regulators or legal authorities that you need to deal with law enforcement? All these are things that you want to have thought about before you're faced with an outage and downtime and a ransom demand, not after it happens. The other thing, and I know it's almost like artificial intelligence, we've all heard zero trust until we're blue in the face. So for those of you playing buzzword bingo, I hope that I've helped you complete a line in your buzzword bingo card, because we are mentioning zero trust, but it's important. If you begin with the assumption that the bad guy's already in your environment, and what do I need to do to make sure that even with a bad guy who's compromised my environment, I can recover, that's a strong place to be. And that's just the basic idea of zero trust. I'll move on now before we deal with questions, and then I hand things back over to you, Emily. One more URL for you. And remember, we also do have downloads for you, so more resources. This is the connection link for that ransomware trend survey that I talked about earlier. If you would like to find out what 1,200 global victims, all of who got hit by ransomware, went through, if this might arm you for a conversation that you're going to have with leadership, then please take a look at this and see if you can get any good learnings from it. We will be doing this again next year, and it'll be interesting to see sort of if the landscape has gotten better or worse when we do that. So that's my recommendations. Jerry, I'll close out with you. Do you have any final thoughts or observations for our viewers today based on your experience and what the city of Phoenix has gone through?
Oh, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, no, I appreciate all the questions that you had. I think, you know, for the most part, what we found is, you know, working together, working with the different groups, right, and getting everybody on the same page is usually the biggest struggle. Guess people want to do what's right. They want to make sure, you know, it's you know, we're protected at the city. It's working daily with the different groups, right, as they're working through their daily activities, and making this, you know, part of that, you know, being aware that, you know, we don't just open up remote access to anybody. You know, there's a process for that. We don't just you know, you stand up a new server, it requires these things. So we have templates. Automation is really good. It's a struggle to get there for most, you know, I would say for most municipalities, most government organizations, and especially for those of us that have been in IT for 20 plus years, we don't trust it all that well, right? Because as soon as something breaks, it's like, oh my God. But the automation kind of does keep you standardized, right? Standardized and moving forward. So as the groups, you know, as they start to adapt more and adopt more automation and more custom uniformity, I should say, things get a little bit easier, and the groups start to say, oh, you know, we are moving in a good target, you know, in a good place. We are starting to move forward. So it is a long journey. It's not something that happens overnight, but it's well worth the effort.
Yes, and it sounds like there's a light at the end of the tunnel in Phoenix's experience, so that's perfect. That's good to hear. I'll close with one question, Emily, before I turn things back over to you. I want to make sure that we stick with our timeline, and we can wrap up right around 10 minutes before the hour. But we have the question submitted by a user that I love. In Veeam's experience, what do organizations who are hit by ransomware find surprises them about the experience? In other words, we thought we're prepared, we backed up our data. What is it that we have not thought of that is a surprise? There are two things that you might want to take into account, and I'm citing this from my tech support team. We have helped thousands of organizations recover from ransomware. The first of those is that if you need outside help, and most organizations do rely on outside digital forensics or incident response teams, figure out how to get those folks on retainer before the incident happens instead of just picking up the phone. Because as you might guess, security teams are pretty busy right now. And if you don't have help already reserved, already committed to you, you don't want to be in a situation with calling a dozen providers and finding out that all of them have nobody sitting on the bench and that you're going to have to wait before you get the help you need to recover. Cyber insurance, by the way, can be a huge help with that if you're at a level of government or an organization that can do cyber insurance. That usually comes with it. The other learning that I'll just pass along, Emily, before I hand it over to you, the other learning that a lot of organizations have is that your assets that you were thinking you were going to recover on, your storage arrays, your servers, et cetera, might be still involved in digital forensics, or might be being investigated or still cordoned off by law enforcement at the time you need to recover. So think about, if I need to recover to a net new environment that I'm sure is clean, that can't just get re-compromised and re-ransomed right away, do I already have the data sitting there? Or do I have to factor in time to transfer terabytes and terabytes of backup data to a new location before I can even begin to recover? Those are questions that it's really good to ask, and those are surprises that we have seen a large number of organizations run into. And with that, we're right before the 10-minute mark. So Emily, I will turn things over to you to close things out. But Jerry, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate your experience. And I appreciate your journey with Veeam.
Thanks, Jeff.
All right. So, like Jeff mentioned, we are nearing the end of today's training. But before we log off, I do have a couple of reminders for our audience. First things first, there are plenty of resources for you all to download for the resource section. So, make sure you check those out. There's also this QR code here for this global report. So, lots of information for you to kind of continue on your ransomware journey. So, lots of learning opportunities there. Jeff and Jerry, thank you both so much for sharing your insights with us today. You gave me a lot to think about, and I know you did for our audience as well. So thank you both so much for that. Like I said earlier, we will be sending you an on-demand version of this training tomorrow. So check your inboxes for that. You can watch it on demand, send it along to one of your colleagues who maybe needs a little refresher. That is always a good use of time. But on behalf of GovLoop and Veeam, I hope you enjoyed today's session. And as always, we really appreciate and value the work that you do. So thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us this afternoon. I hope you have a great rest of 2024, and we'll see you back here with more trainings next year. Bye, everybody.